There are conversations we can't put off any longer. They do happen in different places, in gatherings, in small groups, but too often they don't reach wider, more diverse audiences, the kind that truly open up space for dialogue. What does it mean to write from the U.S. South? What are the challenges, the tensions, and the joys for women writers of Hispanic origin who were raised and educated in the United States? How do race and identity shape us? What defines a shared sense of Latinidad? What role does language play, and what does it mean to recognize that speaking one language or another can also carry traces of trauma? And how is it that food can both bring us together and at the same time reveal our differences? These are the questions at the heart of the invitation Amy E. Wright extended to 4 writers from the South: Stephanie Elizondo Griest, Dailihana Alfonseca, Diaz, and Tita Ramírez, to come together in conversation. In March, Hablemos Escritoras was invited to the Sheppard Library in Greenville, North Carolina, where we witnessed a community eager to listen, to learn, and to engage. This is that live conversation titled Desde que Sur, Latinas Writing from the South. And this is Hablemos Escritoras, a space for opening conversations. I am Adriana Pacheco, and I am deeply grateful to everyone who made this gathering possible.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Bienvenidos, bienvenidas. Thank you all so much for being here tonight for this great event, Latinas Writing from the South. Un aplauso. Before we begin our conversation, I would like to take just a moment, in about 5 minutes here, to thank the many people and institutions who have made this possible. First, my deepest gratitude to the Witchard family, whose generosity created the David, Julian, and Virginia Souther Witchard Distinguished Professorship in the Humanities here at East Carolina University. The vision behind this professorship is to bring the humanities into meaningful dialogue with the wider community. And I'm really happy to say that I can see that tonight's gathering is an amazing example of that mission in action. My sincere thanks go to Thomas Harriot College of Arts and Sciences and Dean Allison Donnell. I believe I just saw her come in. There she is. She's scary. And her amazing team, whose coordination behind the scenes from the Dean's office has been essential in support of tonight's event and in broadcasting this event to our wider community. I would also like to thank my 2 academic homes here at ECU, the Department of Foreign Languages and Literatures, and the Department of English. Their collaboration and enthusiasm have made this event possible. In particular, I want to mention the very hard work of our department chairs, Dr. David Smith and Lita Cope, alongside the assistance of our fabulous FLL staff, Suzanne Powell and Lily Johnson. We are also extremely grateful to the North Carolina Literary Review and their illustrious editor, Margaret Bauer. Dr. Margaret Bauer is kindly offering our visiting writers the dinner venue for this evening, and she continues to play such an important role in supporting literary culture in the state and region. Another crucial partner tonight's event is the Sheppard Memorial Library. Let's give them a round of applause for offering this space. We believe that public libraries are among the most important, the important cultural spaces in our communities. We are deeply grateful to be here, and my thanks go especially to Roman Leary. Roman, take a bow. The library's director, for his most generous hospitality in hosting the event tonight at the public library, thereby making it more accessible to the larger community of Pitt County. And lastly, in this round, I want to acknowledge the presence of my very enthusiastic readers and students. Over here, my students are here, and there are other students from ECU who are here We've been together this semester in our Latina literature course. We have held that course in English, Spanish, and some happy Spanglish as well. And we have been working really hard this semester on an exciting digital humanities project. It's called Mapping Latina Literature in the U.S., which I will be inviting our authors and Hablemos escritoras to get to know. Students, your interest and engagement with the writers and their works is a huge part of why we organize events like this one. And I'm excited to have you here. Yep, they've been great. They've been great. And now, the table, la mesa. A most special thanks to the amazing work of Hablemos Escritoras and its founder and producer, Dr. Adriana Pacheco, who is moderating tonight's conversation. Dr. Pacheco is a research fellow at the Teresa Lozano Long Institute of Latin American Studies at the University of Texas at Austin. For some 10 years, is that right? 10 years, you have been working very hard as director and producer of an extraordinary literary platform which documents and amplifies voices of contemporary women across the Spanish-speaking world. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Adriana Pacheco, who traveled from Mexico City to Greenville just yesterday. There's a great round of applause. And now I think I have 1 minute more. I have a couple of things to say about our very special writers. And last but not least, I want to just mention that the broader reach of this event that Hablemos Escritoras is allowing is especially meaningful. The voices we celebrate tonight are part of a vibrant and growing literary landscape here in the American South. All too often, conversations about literature overlook the remarkable work that emerges from Latino communities in our region. Tonight's event highlights how these women writers living and working in the Carolinas help to reshape the stories we tell about the South, stories about identity, migration, memory, and community. So finally, I want to thank all four of our very extraordinary writers for being here. Dailihana Alfonseca is an author whose work merges Latin American narrative and mental health research to explore immigrant experience, memory, and her own personal Afro-Caribbean heritage. After years of migration, including some time in North Carolina, Dailihana now lives in South Carolina, where she's working on an upcoming collection of poetics titled The 101 Times That I Fell in Love. Von Diaz, an Emmy-winning documentarian and food historian, explores how food carries histories and migrations of communities across the Caribbean and American South. Von was born in Puerto Rico, raised in Atlanta, and currently resides in Durham. She has worked with oral history at UNC Chapel Hill and StoryCorps, while her writings and recipes frequently appear in the New York Times. Stephanie, at the end of the table here, an award-winning author of some 6 books, is a professor of creative nonfiction and has spent decades writing about borders, travel, and cultural identity. A proud Tejana, like Adriana, Stephanie studied at the University of Texas and shares strong ties on both sides of the U.S.-Mexico border. She currently teaches at UNC Chapel Hill. Last but not least, we have Tita Ramírez, novelist and professor who explores diaspora, family memory, and Cuban-American identity in her acclaimed novel from 2024, Tell It To Me Singing. Tita was born in Louisville, probably not saying that right. No, you are. Louisville, and raised in Miami. She now lives in Greensboro, North Carolina, where she teaches creative writing at Elon. Together, the vast accomplishments of these 4 writers represent the extraordinary creativity and diversity of Latina literary voices working in our region today. It is truly an honor to bring them here together for this conversation. Thank you again to all of you for being here. And now it's my great pleasure to invite our moderator, Dr. Adriana, to begin our conversation.
What a crowd. Oh my goodness. En mis sueños más locos, in my wildest dream, never. Wow, amazing. And you know what is amazing? That we are at a public library. That is amazing. Yeah. I really, really want to recognize public librarians. They really change lives, community, and they give us hope that something else can happen outside of the world. Thank you. Thank you, Amy, for your words, of course. And let me read. I just have 5 minutes. Fortunately, Amy
made the introduction of the writer so we can go into the conversation very fast. But let me read something that I prepared for this. Before of that, I want to really thank you. Thank you, Amy, for opening this space for us. It is very hard to cross borders, to cross boundaries, and especially to really know people that follow our projects. So now today I met some people that know already Hablemos Escritoras, and I am very, very moved because of that. Thank you also the Department of English and the Department of Foreign Language and Literature for making this event possible. When I started Hablemos Escritoras almost 9 years ago, then from the very beginning, and now we have next month is going to be 700 episodes. Listen. We have the largest encyclopedia in the world about the women writers from Hispanic-speaking countries, and especially writers writing in English that have Hispanic heritage. It has been an amazing, amazing journey. Today's panel is being recorded, and it will be available as a permanent audio, along with interviews with these 4 amazing writers. Today was a beautiful day, and last week I had a beautiful interview with Tita by Zoom. So you can go and visit our website, hablemosescritoras.org, or you can listen on also platforms like Spotify, iVoox, Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and YouTube. Okay, this was just the announcements because I have to take the opportunity. Let me start with an idea. The South is not just a place. It is a story Americans tell about themselves. Who gets to tell that story? Because it has been described as a conflicted place because of its history, morally and historically context. In terms of American history, the South comes for recovering the past, race conflict, rural decline, religion, violence, and redemption. It is often imagined as a region shaped by the Civil War and magnolia trees with these beautiful flowers. In terms of literature, some names that come to our minds are, of course, William Faulkner, of course, Flannery O'Connor, Tennessee Williams. But here comes the Latino, Hispanic, Afro-Latino border writers to disrupt the older definition of what is the South. Because Latinidad and Afro-identities disrupt Southern racial frameworks, paradigms, and stereotypes. Because Latina and Latino Southern writers show another view of the black-white binary that has been imposed along the time. Because they add transnational memory. Because they bring Spanish and Spanglish and cadence and music while they are writing and speaking. Because they open our house to migration, trauma, exile, displacement, religious syncretism, and amazing food, and also gender stereotypes. And tonight's conversation feels especially fitting in that context because we are here to think about storytelling, place, and belonging, and to put on the table a question that might be or seem or sound simple, but it is not. Desde qué sur? From which South? Whose South? From what South are women writers writing and producing their work? Our panelists come from Texas-Mexico borderlands, from Puerto Rico to Georgia, from Miami shaped by Cuban exile, and from Carolinas, Las Carolinas, through an Afro-Latin Caribbean lens. They are journalists, food historians, fiction writers, poets, scholars, and teachers. Through reportage, recipes, memory, research, and births, they expand what the South means geographically, culturally, and emotionally. If the South has been often narrated in certain voices, tonight we are invited to listen to new cartographies vibrant and alive, and to see how these writers move beyond national borders to gather new voices and create spaces for dialogue and learning. Thank you, all of you, for driving from long distances and coming this beautiful town that is my first time here, and I am so pleased to be for the first time in North Carolina. Thank you, Stephanie, Tita, Bon, Diana, Amy, thank you. If you want to know more about them, so please visit their website and our website. And please join me in welcoming them with a rumba. Let's start with a simple question. Where are you from? Well, do you want something easier? That's like that. So that is going to be 4-inch. I am from many places in America. I'm Puerto Riqueña. I was born there. We moved to New York, then Massachusetts, then Miami, then all over this. I've lived in almost 15 states. I don't know. Yeah. So I've lived all over America. I'm all over America. I'm from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. I'm a gypsy almost. Wow. Thank you so much, Adriana. It's really such an honor to be here. I'm also from Puerto Rico. I was born in Rio Piedras. And then my second home was Atlanta, Georgia. Since that time, I have lived in 29 homes. I have had 29 kitchens where I have cooked countless meals. And today I am of North Carolina, a state that I never anticipated living in, but which I'm finding incredibly beautiful. The landscape is gorgeous. The river system takes my breath away. And the mountain landscape really is inspiring. So today I'm of North Carolina.
Testing. Okay. So this is on. Hi. As Amy said, I was born in Louisville, Kentucky. But I made it to Miami by the time I was 5. And I grew up in Miami until about my mid-20s. And then I hiked up Florida a little bit into the mid-Florida region and hung out in Gainesville, Florida for about 3 years and tried to figure out what I was doing with my life. And what I ended up doing with my life was going to grad school at UNC Greensboro in North Carolina, where my mom lived also at the time. She was over in Asheville. And so when I got into UNC Greensboro, she was like, well, that's obviously where you're going, or else I'm going to, never talk to you again. And I was like, okay. Luckily, it was the school I wanted to be going to. So I matriculated there, did my master's at UNC Greensboro, great MFA program, met my now husband, and never left. And I live in Greensboro and teach about 30 minutes east of there at Elon University. And I am now of North Carolina.
Fun, everybody. Let's see. Similar to all of us, I think that's one of the many things we all have in common is just living in so very many places. I'm originally from the Frontera, Corpus Christi, Texas. Anybody heard of Corpus Christi, Texas? We'll be talking about the home of Selena. Yes, that's where I'm from. So yeah, as I lived there, I grew up there. Soon after graduating college, I began about a 20-year period of living on the road. And so I lived in dozens of places, including Moscow, Beijing. I lived all over Mexico and was fully nomadic for some period of time, and ultimately decided that I really needed to grow some roots, grow more of a community. And luckily, there was a wonderful job opportunity to do all of that at UNC Chapel Hill. So I've been living there since 2013. Yeah.
Thank you, ladies. As you can see, moving from one part to another, mobilization is so important in the way they see the life. And it's that impacts, of course, what they are writing. But now you are located in the south of the United States. But it is very hard to define what is the South. So now here comes another simple question. Yeah, Stephanie, you can go that way. Now, okay. When you hear the phrase writing from the South, what South comes to your mind? A geographical place? An idea? Nothing?
I would say, to me, the South is a witnessing. I believe that what we are doing in the South is documenting both
the wounds of our collective past. And we are also really struggling through this highly uncertain future. And where Latinos come in, I think, is we are reclaiming the stories that haven't yet been told.
These questions are not simple. Okay. What South? I don't know. And of course, the big question is, what is the South? For the longest time, I thought the South was, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Alabama, Tennessee. I'm bicultural. My mom's Anglo. So she was born in Kentucky, grew up in West Virginia and Tennessee, mostly Tennessee, actually. Well, maybe half and half. Little kid and part of middle school in West Virginia, and then the rest of it in high school in Tennessee. And so, in my head, that's the South. It never occurred to me that Florida is located in the south of the United States. And Florida is where I spent most of my my whole growing up years. And in fact, when I got to Gainesville, Florida, that's when I started hearing, traditional Southern accents. Nobody had used y'all in my life until I got to Gainesville. And now we all use y'all, no matter who we are. But I don't know. I'm still working on it. I'm still trying to figure it out because I'm realizing that the Florida is the South, and not just Florida, but Miami is the South to a certain extent too. And I feel like I've got all of those inside of me, including my mom's Tennessee. And, and actually she would have told you, my mom has passed, but she would tell you West Virginia is not the South. Yeah. She said they fought for the North in the war. Okay.
Wepa. And I'm going to answer this in two ways. As a journalist who writes for a number of publications, I've had to understand the South geographically as the area that is south of the Mason-Dixon line, all the way over to Texas, but not Oklahoma. No sé por qué. Oklahoma's not included. And so to a certain extent, I have lived most of my life in what is sort of the commonly understood geographic South. But I want to conjure the scholar Marcy Cohen Ferris, who wrote a wonderful book called The Edible South, where she really troubled my notion of the South to include what a lot of people consider the global South. The global South includes all of the Caribbean because the relationship between the Caribbean and the American South is inextricable. The American South would never have been if it hadn't been for the industry, the migration, the creation of culture, and the movement of people and ingredients and dishes from different parts of the world into this part of the world. So to me, I'm always speaking from the global South. So good. There's such a beautiful answer. We're falling in love. We just met. I feel similarly to Vaughn. I feel like I've been writing from the South my entire life because to me, the South is the Caribbean. When I think of American history, I think of Christopher Columbus first and foremost. And I think of, him finding Haiti and finding the Taino people and that being the birthplace of the Americas that we know today. Without him, there would be no English-speaking America, right? When I think of the culture that I bring to the American South, the global South, I think I've always been writing from the South. The South has always been existing within me. I didn't realize, the differentiation of like Appalachian music, banjos, and how that came after Caribbean emancipation and them moving into, America and bringing it here, right? All that migration existing southern up, right? So that idea that the South has been moving north to escape this prejudice has been existing from the Caribbean as an anchor, pre-existing the idea of English-speaking American history. And so, much like all of us, I think we've all been writing from the South without sometimes even knowing it.
Yeah, all those, no, that you keep that. They run away of the from the microphone. Did you know that Texas and Florida are not part of the South, according to books? And on the other hand, geographically, they are in the South. So you mentioned also one word, the war. So the Civil War marked the southern states. Also the writers. If you remember William Faulkner, it is description of the space and suffering, crossing all these woods and forests and talking about death and disappears and pain. Characteristics also of the Southern literature. But you said something very important. The native people that was part of the South and that came, for example, the Taínos coming from the Caribbean, no? And we have also to recognize the natives, the indigenous people that are part of this, part of the whole country. But if we are talking about the South, there must be a North. How do you feel different from the writers from the North? Do you think that there is a, you can recognize a writing from the South, a writing from the North, literature from one part, literature from another? Or do you think that there is not that books? That line.
These easy questions. Oh my gosh, I answer these in my sleep. So I don't think that many writers especially migratory writers in the Northeast, New England, consider themselves from the South because they don't think of their migration as a great migration, right? So I think as someone who was raised in Massachusetts and New York and then chose to reside in the South willingly, right? I'm often looked at as this weird anomaly. Like, what are you doing down there? Like, what's happening down there? You know, it's dangerous down their parks and down their parks. And I'm like, yeah, I know. And so oftentimes I try to bring a bridge of understanding to them to make them realize that they've always been a part of the South, right? That being in New England changed the fact that they also came from a deep, dark, down South, right? A dark past, right? My favorite thing is the black polemic of Spanish-speaking, of Spain, right? How we sort of othered them during the colonization of the Americas and made them the other, right? And that sort of created a differentiation. Like, there's so much more horrible to enslaved people than we are. Oh, right? But when it was just as atrocious, right? The South has always been existing in us, right? And when we move into places like New York and we become part of the North, we sort of abandon this idea of that South. And so I think even the North is a part of the South in some ways. I mean, look at the Harlem Renaissance, a perfect example of when the Great Migration forced that cultural shift, forced that cultural birth. I mean, the North has always been a part of the South. It just chooses to alienate itself from it.
Todas de nuevo. La misma pregunta.
La misma pregunta.
Dios santo.
Después vienen las preguntas individuales.
Okay, adelante. Dale. So this is interesting because I've never thought about this dichotomy before you just asked me of sort of a feeling of North and South. And maybe that's because I am a writer, but I found my voice as a writer through food. And not just the sort of narratives of food, not just beautiful descriptions of the taste and the smell and the way that you cook, but also the process of writing a recipe, which I would argue, despite sort of metric versus other measurements, right? Like, are we using cups or liters? And is that a recipe is a guide to the creation of a delicious thing. And cooking, describing food, describing the joy of eating, I find really universal. So I don't think I feel a distinction. I feel sort of deeply Southern because that is my root, but also that I write from a universal voice because I've learned the language of cooking.
The question is, do I feel like there's a big difference between a Northern writer and a Southern writer? I mean, we have the stereotype of the Southern writer, but the whole point of this event is to break that down, right? Or to expand it, maybe. So if the Southern writer is known more for their emphasis on place, their emphasis on language, and not just language, but dialect, whether it's a white writer or a black writer, which up until today has been the dichotomy, has been the only, way to be a Southern writer, right? You're either William Faulkner or you're Alice Walker. I don't know. I'm hesitant, give me a glass of wine and a couple hours in the spats, I'll find you a northern writer who's really into their place and really into their dialects. But that being said, I do think that there's a vibe. There is a Southern vibe. And so I'll just say this. I feel like Hispanic, Latinx, Latina writers fit into the traditional stereotype of the American Southern vibe in a way that we may not fit into the traditional stereotype of any other geographical place, because that stereotype involves a loving of place, of setting, also like a huge emphasis on community and family, and then also dialect and language. And I'm just going to throw food in there because I can. And because I've actually thought about this a lot. I've thought a lot about I think one of the reasons that when I moved into like the quote unquote real South, and I'm married to a guy from Atlanta who says y'all and cooks a pig like you wouldn't even believe, but also cooks a lechon like you wouldn't even believe. And it's because there's so many similarities in those two cultures. I don't know. I'm sitting here talking about, I can't answer your question. I don't know. I'm passing the mic.
I would say that the gatekeepers are in the North and publishing and American publishing. So my own experience earlier on in my career, so when I was just starting out, like in my early 20s and going on to like my early 30s, I so many times pitched the Holy Trinity of, Harper's, The New Yorker, and Atlantic Monthly. And every single story that I pitched, they always turned down saying, it's too regional, it's too regional, it's too regional, right? And I'm like, Latinos are too regional? Like indigenous people are too regional? Like those are the stories that I was pitching. And they would write random stories about one individual from the North, but never, in my own experience, from the areas that I was interested in writing about. So that was so confusing to me. And I even like moved to New York to try to pick up that vibe. So I do think that I felt from the time that I began writing very much an imperative to sound more New Yorker, whatever that means, because that was what I view the way to be able to share the stories with a wider audience, which was the whole point of what I was trying to do. But I do want to stop and say that I think there really is something about the land here. So one of the most powerful experiences of my life was I once spent a year with a team. There were 8 of us, and we were from all over the country. And we were writing a K through 12 version of A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn, which maybe some of you heard about. So this was in the year 2000. So it was like the first time I bought a cell phone. We had laptops and digital cameras, all this like new technology. And we had an audience, a K through 12 audience of about 500,000 students that followed us. So it was an incredible audience. And we were I drove about 48,000 miles across the country that one year. And anyway, one of my partners was Nick Tilson, who, if you look him up, he's now one of the major Native leaders we have in this country. He's of all Lakota Sioux from Pine Ridge. Anyway, at the time he was 18 and just out of juvie, actually. So how do you know? He lived a lot already at 18. And I was like 26. Anyway, so we were, living in a car. And just as, we had cell phones, but not internet. So we just talk the entire time talking. Anyway, and so we were like, I can't remember where we were coming from, but when we got to the South, we got to Georgia and he really started having nightmares. It was so interesting because, we'd been traveling for a long time, and there were times when we were literally sleeping in the car. Our budget was $15 a day. So we were literally like pulling into, parks and, anyway, we were very creative about how we would go to sleep. So, but he would have these really violent nightmares, and they really got bad when we got to New Dakota. And then we didn't even know where Dakota, we didn't know the significance of it, but when we got there, we realized that is where the Trail of Tears was signed, right? And so he was just picking up on all of the ghosts out here, right? So I do think that that is something. So when I say that we write from wounds, we're witnessing here in the South, I think that there has been a lot of calamity on the land, and I think that that is influencing our stories.
All of them have gastric cancer. And you can see the conflict. In one hand, we don't want to have labels. We don't want to have categories, no. We have an encyclopedia, more than 1,500 authors, writers, and almost all of them have said the same. We are writers. Not even women. We just write. The gender could be important in some ways. Sometimes nobody cares about that. It's the same region. But at the same time, we're struggling with different problems in the southern part of the country, and the voices have to be louder. If you go to the north, you're crossing all those states going toward Montana, for example. You can barely see Hispanics, or you can barely see African Americans, and they must have their own problem to solve and their own stories to tell. But the region of the South has a very special story and history. Okay, now comes the individual questions. This is for Stephanie and Bon. Stephanie and Bon, like me, they talk to people. They interview people. And sometimes you have that feeling that they trust you. And they tell you things that many times they regret they said us. And then you are the owner of that story. This is for you both. Do you feel an ethical responsibility in telling those stories? And how can you remain honest with what you have heard, but at the same time, what you are writing? No? Do you want to start? Or whenever?
All right. Thank you so much for this question. This is something that I think about a lot. I've probably interviewed maybe 900 people at this point. So I've spent a lot of my life interviewing people, and I'm the kind of interviewer, like, I ask you for a cup of coffee, but what I really want is to, like, come hang out on your couch for about 2 weeks, you know? So that is the type of journalism that I do. I really spend a lot of time, one-on-one time. I generally interview about 100 people per book. So I feel that this is an ethical minefield, and I'm always trying to navigate the mines within the minefield. And so I wrote up a little coda for myself. It's very difficult. I'm not saying that I follow it precisely, but this is what just for my own life conclusion, this is what I feel is ethical practice. So I actually brought it with me so I can read it out. So the first one is language, like really, really, really deeply studying the language of the people that I write about, the communities that I spend time with. So that is no joke. I mean, so I have, over the course of my life, studied Russian, I've studied Chinese, I have studied Spanish. There was a moment when I was studying American Sign Language, I've studied a bit of Mohawk, and I really try to use it, even if I sound like a child. I think that infantilizing actually is a way of kind of returning the power dynamic. So I think there's a lot of, really important reasons why you should always try to use the language. I believe in staying for a year, seeing the calendar change, seeing all of the seasons. So again, just really trying to invest deeply in a place. I believe in documenting it daily. I believe that they are always right. I believe that they are always right. Whatever they say is right. And if it doesn't seem right, I haven't asked the right question yet. So it's about really staying and listening and observing until whatever belief they profess makes some kind of cognitive sense. Not that I agree with it, but that they are in their own right within it. I share the work prior to publication. So that's something that really separates me from a typical journalist. I always share the manuscript with people before it's published. Often that is where the real interview starts. When they see what it is I'm doing, and they're like, oh, I should have told you this story, Also, if there's going to be a huge problem, it's better that it reemerges right then than after publication. So I think that's a really important thing. Recognizing the absolute privilege of this endeavor, and then find a way to channel the privilege into an empowerment for the community. So that's something I've been thinking a lot about. And so moving a little less from the kind of writing that I've previously done and more into teaching, so they can actually write their own story and share their own story in their own way. So that can be through teaching, that can be through editing, things of that nature. So that's how I've been trying to navigate the ethical minefields of writing about others.
Thank you.
It's tremendous. I wrote all of those down in very short count. I don't know if y'all are aware, I just learned this about Stephanie, that her books are 10-year projects, which is like, gives me chills to think about also the privilege of getting to take that time to think and go back over and ensure that people feel that they're represented. I think my answer is going to be very different because I operate in a quicker journalistic space. So I write for online publications, newspapers, magazines. I also produce audio for NPR's Morning Edition as part of my work at StoryCorps. And in that work, I take 45-minute to 2-hour-long oral histories and turn them into 2-minute pieces. Every week we do that with a number of pieces that we consider. And that practice has informed every other aspect of my work, because when you're working quickly, you don't have the privilege of this beautiful coda that Stephanie has just described, which I wish I could often. But instead, my sort of ethical core is a little bit more situated in listening really closely and then doing the best I can to create something that I feel represents the person and that I can show back to them, because I do have that practice as well, and that they feel represented in the way that I have presented them. I will also say that from my perspective in working in this much quicker space, this space is changing in a very complicated way as we are introduced to new, quicker, shorter forms of media. And I have been a producer at StoryCorps for off and on for about 11 years. And in that time, I have encountered people who would record an oral history and we would produce a beautiful piece and they'd be satisfied. Today, people want to have a lot more active control over the way that they are represented, especially if the way and the mode in which they're represented is in a massive web post of some sort. NPR has 3 million plus listeners every single Friday morning. The internet is vast. It is endless. And the opportunity for misrepresentation, for completely reinventing a person, for all of the things that we know are very scary that can happen using new technologies to actually create a new voice, a completely different narrative, a new face. And I'm starting to see that represented in a way that is making me really nervous, because it's actually making people clam up a little bit and be less open. Wow. And so I try to navigate that through cooking a lot of times, and through focusing on food as a vessel for understanding people and humanity and culture. Food is a universal language. Sitting at a table or on the floor or wherever it is that you sit to eat is a really common practice, and sometimes I'm finding that people might be more revealing about the way that they prepare something, maybe than they are about their attitudes about things. And I will say that what I do certainly share with Stephanie is that I always give the work back to the person before I publish it, and I hope that that is a practice that people continue to do, because it is a tremendous responsibility to be given someone's story and to try your best to represent them in the way that they see themselves.
Aren't they amazing? Amazing. So April is going to be dedicated for them and this event and North Carolina and what's happening here, because they are fantastic. So now, another easy question. This is for Tita and for Dailihana. Okay, so you talk about telenovelas. Abismos de pasión. O sea, a mí me prohibían ver telenovelas cuando era niña. pero la señora que nos cuidaba, sí, nos dejaba verlas escondidas. Y cuando mi mamá entraba a la casa, apagaba la tele. We were reading a book. The TV was off. No, and she never knew. I'm sure she totally knew. Yeah. So telenovelas are part of your research and your book. You have to read their books. Amazing. So tell it to me singing. The main topic of the book, there are many, no? But one is how television influence women, especially women. But in many ways, as Dailihana told me in the interview, she was seeing in real life what was happening on TV. The telenovelas was just a small part of reality. But now you both are living and going through another kind of telenovelas. TV series, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, social media, that are crafting a new generation. And especially, and I want to talk about the generation of girls and women. So Tita, can you please start with that? What do you think that is happening now in comparison with that time of the telenovela seated in front of the TV or the radio programs? Do you remember our grandmothers? You're waiting for the radio, no? It was la telenovela, radio novela, no? What do you think is the contrast between that time and what's happening today?
That's an interesting thought. Oh, okay. Sorry, I have a loud voice anyway. That's an interesting idea. I hadn't thought about the idea that social media is creating narratives that we're all watching daily, multiple times a day. Yeah. So the idea of a telenovela, or, in English, a soap opera, basically, is that it's melodramatic, it's over the top, it's these stories that are happening to these characters who themselves are built to be over the top and not real, right? And not act the way we're supposed to act. So these characters act in ways that we're not allowed to act, or that we're not supposed to act. And one of the themes of my book is that sometimes we do act that way, and we kind of need to get over ourselves. And it's interesting to think about the fact that social media is creating a space. Just the internet in and of itself has created a space. One where we are watching other people act over the top. I mean, within the next 20 minutes of leaving here, if you go on your phone, you're going to find a video of somebody acting inappropriately, and someone else has filmed it, and we're all watching it for our pleasure or our disgust or our whatever. But then on top of that, and this is the part that's really complex, and I'm like, I'm not qualified to talk about this. We need smarter people. So I'm about to pass you this mic. But there's narratives that people are creating about themselves online that are false. And then there's these girls that are seeing these narratives, and they're living up, or they're trying to live up to these images. They're these here's how I'm supposed to be. Yeah, that's a complicated idea. I'm going to stop talking.
You did fantastic. So I've always seen the media as a mirror, right? It was one of the first few places I ever saw a representation of a girl who looked like me, right? To me, that mirror has morphed, right? It reminds me of Jacques Lacan, who's a phenomenal psychoanalyst and studied under Freud. And he thought of this idea of the mirror self, and the self that is performed when one looks in the mirror for the first time and realizes that when they look down at themselves, they are not the whole they see in the mirror, right? And that creates a separation of self and separation of this idea of self. And that is then reflected through the media that we consume when this new mirror is put in front of us, right? So growing up, when I would watch, I don't know if you guys remember this, but Telemundo used to have an MTV called Mundos. And they used to it was the MTV of Latin
girls and guys, and they would play a bunch of like reggaeton on there, and like they would like dance. It was like really strange media, but it was the only media that I could consume where I saw girls who dressed like me, looked like me, wore hoop earrings, had slick back hair, had their bellies out, and they were like outside, like doing the thing, like living like Latina girls that I saw every day. So that was my mirror. Seeing today's mirror, it is definitely what I consider like performative media as tangible reality, right? So it's the only thing that we see that we are consuming now. Even like look at how many broadcasting companies are now owned by Hulu and Netflix. MGM is now owned by Amazon. That's fascinating. That says something about how we're consuming media, because the media is no longer a place where you go home and ingest it. It is now always around us, right? So this idea that, social media, short form content is the new media is this warped reality. And I mean, everybody's been quoting 1984, George Orwell. And like, the media has always been a mirror that has been sold to us. And what does it mean that we are now creating that which we sell to ourselves, right? That's the real question that I think we need to ask ourselves as we look in these mirrors of like, what does it mean that this is the idea I've chosen to look into today? That this is the life I've decided I wanted to see reflected in this mirror today, right? We go out of our way to search for things now, right? To find that mirror, to find that reflection. And I think that's how television has become a new mirror in short form content, TikTok, as you said, YouTube Shorts. I mean, when YouTube Shorts came out, Instagram immediately came off like, nope, don't go over there. Don't go over there. I got something for you. Come here. Come hither. See, short form content, we can do it too. And then now with like the Meta Ray-Bans that you can wear and you can look at someone's face and see where they live and see who they are. That's a new mirror that you aren't even aware you're being looked through and being looked into, right? So these are mirrors. Everything is a mirror that we are now starting to realize was we were unaware of before, right? Like the consciousness is awakening. Yeah. And that's my answer. That's the only thing I got before. So like that.
Wow. That is what I love about what I do. I learn a lot, all different visions. This is fantastic. And I am sorry, but I have more questions. And I know that you have questions. So I'm going to take 5 more minutes before we pass the microphone. And I want to thank that gentleman that helped us all morning recording all these writers. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so this question, I can avoid this because language is so big, so important. And I love, when this second, third generation of Hispanics living in the United States, they mix Spanglish. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. So just call yarderos, la yarda. They are creating new vocabulary. And at the same time, you are also putting some cadence and music and all this rhythm. And this lady said something that I absolutely love. And I said that I'm going to give credit, but I'm going to steal that idea. 2 islands on my tongue. How hard can be that? Because we struggle with everything, the pronunciation. We are pretending that we speak one language, but at the same time, we are speaking in another language. And we are dreaming in another language. So very, very short, tell us about how important is language when you are writing? Because you decided to write mostly in English, but you have the Hispanic heritage. So tell us about that one. Start with that.
A ver, I was born in Puerto Rico to 2 very young parents, and the beginning of my life started on that island. But I remember the moment, I'll try to be short, as you said. I remember the moment we were living in Georgia on a military base, and I remember the moment where I learned English. It happened. It was a switch in my mind. I was walking down the street with two new friends, and up until then, I hadn't said a word. They had been speaking in English, and I had been picking it up. I was probably 5. And I remembered this feeling. It was almost like a possession. And suddenly I understood everything that they were saying. And I realized that I had already been understanding everything that they had said. And I'm very fortunate that from that moment on, my mother still has a heavy Latina accent. My father does too. They both lived in the States since that time. But my parents insisted on speaking Spanish at home, and they sent me back to Puerto Rico. My first love in scholarship was Cuba, and you cannot study Cuba unless you speak and read Spanish. And so I've remained in this constant limbo in between both languages. Y a veces se me hace más fácil hablar en español, y a veces I'm thinking in English. And so I just let whichever language or word flow in whatever way. I think my sassiest self is in Spanish. I lack the intellectual vocabulary I need to communicate in Spanish, though. And so I just flow until what I want to describe is algo más sensible, un color, un olor, un sentimiento, no sé, and then I just let that be the thing that comes out.
I'm the exact opposite. Because I had an Anglo mom who didn't speak very much Spanish. My father spoke only Spanish at home, so we spoke English at home. Sorry. And so the Spanish that I learned from him to a certain extent, and from family members. I had several family members who lived in Miami during my growing up years, but really, really, I think the way I learned Spanish, aside from the Spanish classes that my parents insisted that I take, and I was not allowed to take intro, I had to take intermediate, blah, 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 was from my friends and their families, because in Miami in the 1980s, where I lived, everybody was Cuban. Until everybody was Cuban or Honduran and Panamanian and Colombian and Guatemalan, and it was great, you want to talk about food, oh my God. And or Puerto Rican, right? Or Dominican. The whole point is, like, I lived in an enclave essentially, and that's where I learned my Spanish. But kind of like you, I only learned it to a certain extent, and I think you're probably like officially fluent. You just maybe don't have, like you were saying, certain kinds of academic or intellectual vocabulary. But outside of that, like, it's very clear that you're going all the time. When I write, it really, really depends on what I'm writing. My novel is narrated by a daughter who is Cuban American, born in the States, and her mom who is Cuban, born in Cuba. And so they both speak English and Spanish. But the idea of my novel is that whenever Monica, the main character, is talking to her parents, she's speaking in English. And whenever they're talking to her, they're speaking in Spanish. It's not written in Spanish most of the time, but that's the idea, because that's how it happens in bilingual families a lot, especially second gen, when you got second gen kids. So I use a lot of Spanglish, and I'm very intentional about it in my work, or at least in this novel. But I knew that Monica would be thinking in English and speaking in English to her family, and then speaking in English to most everyone else in her life, because that's the life of the kid who's born in the States to parents who were born elsewhere. I don't know what direction we're going. We can't, but we're going to come back.
All right. I would say I'm part of the generation of Daihanas that did not grow up speaking Spanish, because our elders had it literally washed out of their mouth with bars of soap for speaking Spanish in the classroom. Students had children had their knuckles smacked with rulers for speaking Spanish in the class. And so as a survival skill and to protect their own children, they did not pass it on to the next generation. So that was my generation. So I did not grow up speaking Spanish. I didn't learn Spanish until I moved to Mexico when I was age 30, and really had to start from the scratch, And so for me, writing in, I absolutely cannot write in Spanish like in any sophisticated way, but even the few words that I can use are to me reclamation. And so it's also really important to me. I read a lot about other countries, and so yes, I always incorporate many, many, many languages. So in my various books, I have Russian, I have Chinese, I have Kinyarwandan, I have Mohawk, I have, and I get just, because I believe it. And all of these languages, most of these languages have also they have linguistic trauma associated with them. Mohawk Indians as well, like the very, very same thing happened in schools in Akwesasne, the nation I read about in my book, All the Ageds and Saints, also had their mouths literally washed out with soap for speaking Mohawk in class, were punished for speaking Mohawk. And yes, so linguistic trauma is a thing, and I feel like literature is one of the ways we can fight back.
I go.
Oh, you got okay. So coincidentally, when I started my master's degree at UNC Chapel Hill, I finally realized that I was writing in English with Spanish grammar. And I was being constantly told that I was writing incorrectly. And nobody could tell me why until I started doing Spanish archival work. And I realized all my grammar was Spanish, but all my language was English. And I had somehow, during my assimilative process, because English is my second language, right? And during my assimilative process, I had merged that. Well, because I went to a school that's taught us Spanish and English. It just so happened.
Yeah.
And I somehow brought them together in order to survive. So when I speak and write, I'm writing in English and Spanish constantly, always. I don't know how to separate them. I can. And much like Stephanie, my grandmother was like, aquí no se habla español. Well, here we speak English because if you speak Spanish, they'll treat you differently. And I come from Puerto Rico, where when American troops took over the island, much like they did in Haiti as well, and in Dominican Republic, they came into the schools and said, abandon this language. And now we have Bad Bunny's English. I know, shout out to him for free. He's like, I'm not going to change my language for you. If this is my music, this is who I am. And so I have found that, like, when people meet me, I often hear that my English is very good. Right. And they consider it a compliment, and I consider it a wound almost. Right. Because I've had to abandon my own culture in some ways, abandon my accent that I used to have. Right. I took ESL classes. I have a poem out there called Spanglish that's also part of a poetic prose essay. And my other poem, ESL, which is the process of me being transferred from, in the same school, a classroom that had no air conditioner, right, where all of us spoke different languages, to a classroom that spoke all English and all of a sudden had air conditioning. In the same school. And I was transferred mid-year, right? So I saw that. That was like a switch went off in my head. I was like, wait a dang minute. Is it nice and cool over here and hot over there? Because I couldn't learn in that stifling heat. I remember that so distinctly. I couldn't learn in a stifling heat. And why was it that these other kids on the other side of this building got to have air conditioning? Just because they spoke this language. Wow. Right? And asking those questions and exploring those ideas. And even now, like, I'm just so, like, it's a trauma.
Yeah.
It's an assimilative trauma, right? Being the kid that went to school with arroz con gandula, the people, what is that? What is that? Even my daughter, I sent her to school with arroz y frijoles. She goes to school with aguacate, rice and beans, and I cook it for her, and I'm like, take your food. And they've asked her, why does your food smell different? Right? But then I met Indian girls who've had the same experiences, Chinese girls who've had the same experiences, Russian girls who've had the same experiences, who brought their cultural anchors into schools and have all been questioned. Right? So these linguistic traumas, assimilative traumas, are things we all experience and we're all living through. We're all existing through, and don't even realize we're living parallel realities next to one another because we've built these barriers that are forced upon us by our society. Right? And that's how I think Spanglish ties into my existence overall.
Man, I know it. Yes, I know it. Okay, so this is the last question for them. But before that, I'm going to ask you for a round of applause to the boys and men in the room.
Oh, yes.
When I founded Hablemos Escritoras and I wrote the first book about these women writers 50 years ago on the podcast, nobody was talking about women writers. No reading, no teaching at schools, no award. And now everybody says like, why only women in your podcast? So this table, we are, of course, women, but we need readers that read more escritoras. And we want also, and we love when men support all this literature that is booming, that is changing the culture. It's not about gender. It's not about women or men, it's literature. Well, okay, now we have, how much time do we have for questions? Oh, yeah. So let's start with the questions. I think that there might be some. And if I don't know who can help us with one of the microphones. Thank you.
I think it needs to turn down this one.
And I'm just going to ask you, please, ladies, be short in your answers. So maybe we can have several questions, no, and move the conversation.
Hi, thank you for being here. It's really exciting for me. I've heard you each in different ways characterize the South using some terms that are kind of written down here. So, war has been mentioned, the Dark South, rising up, oppression, colonialism, writing from wounds, calamity, breaking through, linguistic trauma, all of these sort of negative, right, ideas of the South and the way that it's characterized. And while all of those are true and can't be neglected, I'm curious to hear how you find joy in these spaces. And I think Barty's alluded to that a little bit when you said I'm of North Carolina and you talked about the land. I'm sort of thinking about how you conceptualize joy in the midst of all of that.
I'll be brief and kick us off, and this probably won't surprise you. It really is through food. Food is a universal unifier. We all eat every day. It is the thing that we need, and it is also a way that we care and that we nourish. And I believe that food gives us a profound ability to reclaim and reconnect with spaces that are otherwise full of pain, and can, through that reclaiming, tie us back to some feeling of joy. And, a delicious taste in your mouth, whatever that is for you, is just a beautiful experience that we all have in our own ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wow. I will say that I really knew that I was in the right place literally when I came to my job interview, and they put me up at the Carolina Inn, and so I was walking through. I mean, I just arrived here. I'd never been in North Carolina before, but never not to Chapel Hill anyway. And I was walking out, and I saw a man walk out with like a banjo case. I'm like. And then I walked a little further, and like someone with a fiddle, and I was like, "Wait, what's going on?" And then walking around at night, I actually heard someone playing music on their front porch. I'm like, "This really happens? Like, this is not like it is." So yeah, so music has become such a beautiful part of my life. I actually just 2 years ago, I got a jarana, which is a Mexican ukulele, and it's trying to. I like now play in a band, y'all. Like, it is crazy. I never thought that would happen. That it would only happen, I think, here. Like, just being around music coming from my neighbors' homes and really deeply wanting to tap into that extraordinary expression of all of this, all of the joy, all of the pain, all of the life force coming through music, I think is really special here.
I would say, keeping with the theme of the arts and also with food, the place I live, Greensboro, I said that it's the home of UNC Greensboro, where we have the MFA program in poetry and fiction. And we joke that it's a vortex, but it's kind of a vortex. Like, there's actually a lot of people who go through the program and don't leave Greensboro or sometimes come back. Like, I have friends who have left and come back to live in Greensboro. So we have this really vibrant writing community just in Greensboro. We have a great indie bookstore, and I would say keeping in touch with the writing community, the reading community that was a home for me when I first got to North Carolina has been like an electrifying force in my life. And one of the ways I do that, and we do that, my husband, who also went through the same program, is also a fiction writer and a nonfiction writer, is through parties where we're eating amazing food, whether it's like we're bringing a Cuban dish and somebody else is doing like Carolina barbecue, or we've got music going on. Like, it's just kind of a combo of everything.
And I'm hearing you both talk about gatherings.
Gatherings, yes, gatherings.
Gatherings are much like the writing and the war and the pain that you're reading, a form of resistance and resilience. And that's what you need to remember. As you're diving deep into pain and wounds and all these horrible things, remember that the fact that you're reading it is a testament to resistance and resilience. That's it. Like, yes, it's sad, but thank God I get to know this. I'm so grateful that I get to know this. And that's what keeps me going.
Amazing.
Miss Joan. Yeah, like the question is for you. I don't want to single you out, but when Amy was introducing you, she introduced you as Afro-Latina. Yeah. And I know that that term is really broad. So I wanted to know, how do you define that Afro part of yourself? And how does it show up in your writing?
Yeah. So in my culture and the place where I grew up in this little small town. And when I was in the Bronx, I saw a lot of people that looked like me. But when I moved to Massachusetts, there was a lot of white passing. And I was the other. I was the black girl que no tenía pelo bueno. I didn't have good hair. I had the black dad. And my mom was a single mom because my father was murdered. And she was the stereotype, right? She was the stereotype. She was a black woman within a white space without even really being a black woman, right? So in Puerto Rico and Cuba and many of the Caribbean spaces, if you're light, you're white, right? And then you come to America and you're not white anymore. Yeah, I know, right? Woo. And all of a sudden, when I relocated to the South, I found my beauty. I found who I was. I found community. Like I was telling Adriana, Black women taught me to love myself, and that's when I really started anchoring, because we would often be told, and if you're hearing this on social media right now, like I know Black, I Dominican Papi, right? You've seen it. You've seen Dominican Papi out there with his tight jeans and his tight shirts, and Dominican Papi, he no Black. Right? That's a testament to that colorism that exists. I remember learning about HBCUs and the paper bag test, right? And being like, oh, y'all do it too? Y'all are out here testing Blackness, right? To see who's as bright as we can get them, right? So when I anchor myself in my Black identity, and I identify as an Afro-Latina purposefully, right? Because I remember when I went natural, because I was straightening my hair and I used chemical relaxer in my hair. And my daughter came up to me and she was like, Mommy, I want hair like you. And I realized that I was teaching my daughter that she did not have gorgeous hair by having natural hair. My hair's straight right now because I have 200 papers to grade and I'm too lazy. And I was getting arthritis in my shoulder, y'all, from tangling my hair. I ain't got time. Sorry. Take got time. Or else I'd be out here froed out. Y'all. Just y'all. But, my shoulder, she can't keep up right now. And so, I'll finish up because I know other people have questions. But yes, I had to learn to find my beauty and be okay with being an African woman within the Latina community and being okay with I'm Black, and that's okay. That's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful testament to the fact that I've survived, that I'm here, right? That my ancestors made it and made me. That's a beautiful thing. So thank you. Thank you so much for your question. Yes. And if you have any more, leave it.
Hello, thank you for coming. My name is Hassani. I'm one of Dr. Wright's students. This is pretty much a wrong question. But I remember reading one of your stories, Stephanie, about what defines being a Latina woman. What are certain features that you believe represents your heritage? And it was really interesting to listen to you as well, because I know from my family, we're pretty multicultural in certain ways. But one of the things I realized growing up is, especially when my grandma's part of the Great Migration, is that she brought a lot of certain stereotypes and certain unfortunate, harmful things that she believes is the natural way, which is to always perm your hair. Even to this day, my grandma's perming her hair, and to dye her hair, she used Kool-Aid. So she's really really southern. But like I said earlier, one of the broad questions that I have is, what is one of the features that you hold dear to you that represents who you are as a Latina woman?
Where my story? Okay. I don't know. A story. You want stories? What part? The fact that I'm speaking English with Spanish grammar. Shout out to me, keeping that alive, right? That's one thing. Right. And just being okay with the fact that sometimes, I remember I met my husband and I was like, ooh, upper echelon. He's like, that's not how you say that. I was like, right. I often pronounce words incorrectly. I'm still learning English. Years after I've mastered it, I'm still learning English. And that's my Latinidad existing within me. And that's a beautiful thing. It's okay to be existing in this space as a Latina in many ways, right? Look at this. Look at this. We look like so many different kinds of women, right? That's Latinidad. Just like that, your family is an amalgamation of beautiful color, right? United Colors of Benetton, they call it in marketing. That's the idea. We are everything and everyone, and we exist through so many ways that there's no way to anchor that one idea. And that's what we're here to dispel, that Latinas only look one way.
Oh gosh. Certainly my palette, which is vast, but sort of still focusing on the exterior. When I was growing up in the suburbs outside of Atlanta in the 80s, I was the only Latina girl in my school.
today Atlanta is a very different place, an incredibly multicultural landscape. But when I was a kid, I really stood out, and I really started to stand out when I hit puberty, because parts of my body started to expand exponentially in ways that was totally distinct from other girls in my class. And it became very, very obvious that I had a different heritage. My hair changed, my body changed, my face changed, everything about me suddenly changed. Men started to notice me, all sorts of changes. And it took a while because that can also feel violent, to suddenly be like, wait. I was just existing, and now I stand out. Maybe I don't want to stand out. To sort of reclaim just the shape of myself, and like you, like my hair is also like this today because I was feeling lazy. I know it doesn't look lazy, but it's just it. Trust me, sometimes it's just got to be like that, or however it is that I want to look on any certain day. I think that we live in a world that really celebrates different bodies, despite what's happening on social media. I think we have a lot more examples of how many different ways people can look.
I think I was just thinking about my kids, and I think actually one of the ways that my Latinidad expresses itself, or that one of the like threads within me that is like connected to my Latinidad or my Latina identity is as a mom, as a parent who does speak 2 languages and who insisted on speaking Spanish to my kids when they were very little, and also tried very hard and thank goodness succeeded in getting them into a Spanish immersion program for their K-12 experience, and kind of delivering to them however I can that like, hey, you are multicultural, and here's one element of your multicultural identity, and anchoring that for them. And in fact, when we were naming our kids and thinking about what we wanted to name our kids, a good friend of mine who's a white girl from Ohio said, if you were in Miami, it wouldn't be as important to name your kids something that sounds distinctly Spanish or Latin American or whatever the term I want here is. My kids are named Nicolás and Tomás. And all over Miami right now, people of my generation and your generation, we're different generations when I had my kids late. So like they're naming their kids like Amanda. And their names, everybody's last name is Perez, but our kids are named Amanda. And I'm like, oh, that's so weird. Cause like, and my friend Vicky was like, yeah, but you're wanting to give your kids need to find their identity, and they're going to through a couple different ways. And one of the ways is going to be through their names. If they're living in Miami, they're going to be living in their identity, and they're not necessarily living in their identity in Greensboro right now. Although our South is changing a lot, and that's super interesting. Okay, I'm going to shut up.
Thank you for that beautiful question. My first thought, so I'll just go with my first thought is story. And when I think about story, I think about something that I learned when I was living in Mexico when I turned 30 to try to like come to some sort of reclamation of what I felt had been lost in my own generation. And I spent some time in Chiapas, and I learned something that really blew my mind, which is the Mayan codices were destroyed, all but 3, which don't even reside in Mexico. They're mostly in Europe. The pieces that did survive, but the Spanish colonizers destroyed all of the codices of the Mayan people. So codices were these unbelievable sort of accordion-style books made incredibly painstakingly that had origin stories, spells, recipes, histories, astronomy, math. I mean, all of the knowledge of the Mayan people were in these magical codices, and they were deemed like devil's books, and they were all burned and destroyed. But what I learned is that, as they say, Mayans have a library in their heart. So because it was, there were all of each book was just its own book. So they were already oral stories they were always done in recitation. So people still remembered them, and they passed them on and on and on and on. So what I really feel what has always drawn me to my Latina heritage and what I feel really so strong about maintaining are these ideas of stories that have been for 500 years damaged and destroyed with gatekeepers all around, yet they persist because we all have these libraries in our hearts.
Yeah. So we have time for one more question. Yeah. So I think that
Other questions, but quería saber el querer llegar aquí hoy. It was amazing to see you all here. Y también tenía otra pregunta, la importancia de maybe ser bilingüe. Quería saber.
I can start just because we were talking about this earlier before the panel. To me, if you have the capacity to learn another language, do it and hang on to it because, yes, it can be a point of pride, certainly, and it connects you to your culture. But it also, languages are gateways to other ways of being, to other societies and civilizations, other cosmologies. And when you can, if you want to be living in your life in some sort of storytelling capacity, or you want to understand other people, having this key to unlock their ability to represent themselves fully is just a tremendous superpower. And I am very fortunate that I can do all of my reporting in Spanish, which gives me an opening to communities all over Latin America that I don't know would let me in otherwise. So I know it's difficult and not everybody receives languages in the same way. It's hard for some people, but if you can, do it and preserve it.
I'll just say that I am going to be listening, and I wish I had my notebook. I'm going to be recording this so I can play it back for my kids. Oh, good. I'm going to play this part back for my kids who are like, why do we have to go to Spanish immersion school? God, I hate Spanish. Actually, my older one is he's actually okay. He's also not immersed anymore. He only has Spanish for one period. But my younger one has Spanish almost all day long, and he's dying. And I'm like, and I just keep saying things like what you just said, and I keep saying things like it connects you to your culture. And then if you're somebody who's coming to whatever that language is, and it's not your culture, I don't know, it does things to your brain that, like, are there any musicians in the room, musicians and or singers? My understanding is language does the same thing to your brain that music does. It's like the same, and I don't know, man, it makes you amazing. Like, it makes your brain do crazy stuff. It was just the biology of law.
Well, I would just say you have additional lives. Like, I'm a very different person in Chinese that I am in Russian, that I am in Spanish, just the languages that I've learned. So just why would you not want to have more than one life here on this planet, right? It's so extraordinary.
Because I knew both English and Spanish, I was able to learn how to read medieval English, medieval Spanish, Germanic, right? I was able to teach myself Latin. I was able to teach myself things that otherwise I wouldn't be, just because I found out that there was a language tree. I'm like, it's a tree? It's related? I'd already taken Italian in high school. I'd already taken French in middle school. And I had all these keys that I didn't know that would unlock all this history that I didn't know was also connected to me, right? And then finding out a little bit of Arabic, like Arabic, all these Spanish words that are anchored in the Muslim Empire because it ruled Spain for 400 years. People forget. That's insane. So, turn all the keys. Turn all the keys. Once you have one language, it will open up so many more. Learn the tree. Yeah. That tree will give you so many roots.
wow, thank you. This has been amazing. And of course, we have to give them a very long applause. But before that, something that they talk a lot about in their books and research is family. As the Hispanic, Latino, Black, white community, these writers are also proposing something for family.
And I want to give an applause to Stephanie's mother, which is here with us. And go.
Because we have to honor our mothers and grandmothers. Yeah, and now, please, we have to honor these writers, amazing, and these fantastic audience. Thank you.
Hablemos Escritoras es literatura, entrevistas, reseñas, audiolibros, documentales, traducción y la enciclopedia más grande del mundo en escritoras de origen hispanohablante. La producción de Hablemos Escritoras es por Adriana Pacheco y Andrea Macías. Edición de audio y masterización por Cristian Josefi. Preparación, coordinación, social media e imagen Brenda Ortiz. Colaboradores del proyecto: Liliana Valenzuela, Francesca Denstedt, Anjane Delgado, Isabel Ibáñez de la Calle, Rosemary Salum, Teresa López Pelliza, Valeria Rey de Castro, Julia Santibáñez. Mesa LAM, Literatura alrededor de la mesa, Gabriela Polit, Gisela Cosac, Lorena Amaro, Marta Batis, Mónica Velázquez, Mónica Surmuk. Traductores: Alice Banks y Andrea Macías. Artista residente: Mitana Boykova Josefi. Difusión literaria y de proyectos: Alexander Boisin. La increíble imagen de Hablemos Escritoras es gracias a Enigma Diseño y nuestra poderosísima plataforma Nasolab. Yo soy Adriana Pacheco. Todos los derechos reservados. Austin, Texas, 2026.